I now welcome representatives from the CSIRO Staff Association. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
I am Susan Tonks. I am the CSIRO Staff Association Section Secretary.
I'm Steve Rentoul. I'm a climate scientist at CSIRO and appearing as a delegate of the CSIRO Staff Association.
And I'm Everard Edwards. I'm a research team leader in the Agriculture and Food Research Unit, and I'm appearing here as a governing councillor with the CSIRO Staff Association and delegate.
Thank you. If you have one, I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair. Before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet and extend that respect to any First Nations people participating today. The CSIRO Staff Association is a section of the Community and Public Sector Union and is the primary union representing employees at the CSIRO. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee as part of its inquiry into the funding and resourcing of CSIRO. There's no denying the desperate circumstances of our appearance here today. Over the past year, CSIRO has lost more than 800 jobs and now another 350 full-time equivalent research roles are set to go. The scale of the cuts under the current government are set to surpass those made under the Abbott government. While the government's emergency MyInfo funding is very welcome, it's a once-off measure and does not address the CSIRO's long-term sustainability. Put simply, CSIRO is barely surviving and needs urgent help. Our submission was informed by a survey of more than 400 Staff Association members, which focused on the impact of recent CSIRO job cuts on research capacity, workforce morale and scientific infrastructure. CSIRO plays an irreplaceable role in delivering world-leading science and innovation that underpins Australia's prosperity, security and well-being. Urgent action is needed to protect CSIRO's capacity to deliver public good science and maintain Australia's global standing. This includes immediate funding to prevent job losses, investment in research capacity and long-term support to ensure financial sustainability, as well as improved organisational transparency and accountability. CSIRO has been responsible for some of the most important scientific innovations in Australia's history. Public investment in science and research is often what delivers innovation that lays the groundwork for commercial breakthroughs and increased productivity. Half of all the staff surveyed stated that they were aware of basic or fundamental research conducted by CSIRO that lacked industry funding partners and may be affected by proposed cuts. CSIRO faces rising research costs above inflation, ageing infrastructure and ongoing capital and depreciation costs far exceeding current capital funding. While the 2026-27 MyInfo funding is welcome and will address urgent pressures, again, it is a one-off injection and will not address long-term funding issues. A loss of funding would mean losing independent sovereign capability, making Australia reliant on foreign expertise and risking national interests in areas like water security, climate projection, and pandemic preparedness, while weakening our world-leading environmental, mineral and biosecurity research. CSIRO's training and career pathways for early career researchers are valued for nurturing future scientific leaders and maintaining core expertise, ensuring the next generation of scientists can build the knowledge required to manage Australia's unique challenges. However, recent cuts and reduced opportunities are driving talent overseas, risking a brain drain and diminishing Australia's competitiveness in emerging scientific fields. The survey respondents described a disconnect between executive management and the realities faced by researchers, with decisions often prioritising short-term fiscal metrics over long-term scientific capability. Over 66% of our survey respondents said they do not believe CSIRO leadership understands the importance of specific scientific work when allocating resources, while over 80% don't believe staff are genuinely consulted about priorities before decisions are made. Nearly 25% of survey respondents reported that poor equipment hindered their work, while 40% pointed to inadequate infrastructure as a challenge in the workplace. Significantly, almost 95% of participants identified insufficient staffing as a critical barrier to conducting effective research. These issues have led to project delays, increased stress and reduced research quality. The ongoing and proposed cuts have significantly diminished CSIRO's research capacity. For example, survey participants stated that the loss of a Data 61 staff member has already resulted in the termination of key projects such as flood management in research in Northern Australia. Losing research capability of that nature is particularly hard to comprehend, particularly when confronted by coverage of widespread flooding in Northern Territory and Queensland. As a matter of urgency, we are calling on the government to provide additional funding to halt and reverse staff losses and suspend further cuts pending an independent external review of CSIRO's restructure process. Over the longer term, CSIRO's appropriations must increase at least in line with CPI. Indexation arrangements must reflect real research and infrastructure costs, and Australia must commit to rebuilding CSIRO's research capacity as a proportion of GDP. There will be plenty of evidence before this inquiry in support of the important and unique contribution that CSIRO makes to the Australian economy and community, but there is also a real human impact. For many CSIRO staff, the months ahead will be traumatic and painful. Important research, the product of months and years of dedication and effort, will be abandoned. Lifelong vocations will be questioned and challenged, and for some, careers will prematurely be ended on the very worst terms. CSIRO staff and the Australian community they are dedicated to serving really deserve better. Immediate and long-term funding, accountable leadership and transparent and consultative decision-making with genuine staff engagement is essential to restore and sustain CSIRO's capacity. Today I'm joined by Staff Association members Dr Everard Edwards and Dr Stephen Rintoul, who will also make brief statements of their own. Dr Edwards is a team leader from the Agriculture and Food and Research Unit, and Dr Rintoul is a team leader in the Environment Research Unit. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear here today.
Thank you. Mr Edwards, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to briefly comment on the impacts of the long-term reduction in real-term funding to CSIRO. So I will hit 20 years in CSIRO in a couple of months, and during that time I've gone through at least 4 episodes like the current one where either myself or my teams that I've been part of or have led have been impacted by reductions in staffing and reductions in funding. And the first of those was less than 2 years after I joined CSIRO, where the site I was at, which was a horticulture site in Victoria, was closed down with a loss of more than half of the positions that were there. The result of that and then subsequent reductions is that the number of people committed to horticulture within what is currently the Agriculture and Food Business Unit reduced from around 80 when I joined to around 16 staff to support that industry. So I don't really intend to focus on horticulture in my comments today, other than right now, but I think it's a good illustration of the impact of how funding has changed our ability to support these industries. So horticulture is an industries that are critical to the nutrition of our nation, and whilst we've increased horticultural production over the last 20 years, it's not increased as much as the population has increased, and so therefore I would say it's a key area that still needs to be supported. So currently, CSIRO expects that 70% of research across the research unit is externally funded, and that includes the overheads, which typically are around about 115% of direct costs. And so the impact of this is that we actually no longer really have the ability to support new and up-and-coming industries or smaller industries in the way that we did in the past. If we look at something like the wine industry, CSIRO had a key role in supporting the success of that in the 1980s. But right now we can't really do that because we commit most of our money that we have towards research to agencies or companies that have significant funding that they can provide to us. So because of the leveraging that's required, and that means that if we go back to compare with, say, in the mid-1990s where this really started, we just no longer have the ability to support industries in the same way that we did, and this is directly because we no longer have adequate funding to support investment into those industries. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rintoul.
Hi, my name is Stephen Rintoul. I'm an oceanographer and climate scientist at CSIRO based in Hobart. During my 35 years at CSIRO, I've held many roles from postdoc to acting chief. I've led many national and international ocean and climate research programs, and I believe this experience gives me a useful perspective on the challenges faced by CSIRO, and in particular, the Environment Research Unit. I thank the inquiry for the opportunity to speak to you as a delegate from the CSIRO Staff Association. I am very concerned about my colleagues losing their jobs. This is a very tough time for many excellent scientists that have dedicated their careers to solving Australia's biggest challenges. However, I am even more concerned about the future of Australian science and what this means for the nation. As many submissions have documented, CSIRO's appropriation has not kept pace with the cost of doing science. In real terms, funding for CSIRO has gone backwards for many years. The funding model for CSIRO is broken. Generations of CSIRO leadership have attempted to cope with reduced appropriation in real terms by seeking external funding. The appropriation funding was first expected to be leveraged to obtain 30% co-investment, then 50%, more recently at least 70%, and preferably full cost recovery. But once all the appropriation is fully leveraged, it's the end of the road. And this brings us to the present, where deep staff cuts have been made, are proposed, and further cuts seem likely without a sizable and immediate increase in funding. What are the consequences of reduced funding for CSIRO? In my own area of climate science, my concern is the following. Almost every sector of the Australian economy and society is affected by climate, including water, energy, food security, transport, health, national security, and community safety. To respond to the challenges of a variable and changing climate, Australian decision makers urgently need to know what lies ahead. Cutting research at CSIRO Environment reduces our ability to provide Australians with the information they need to secure a healthy, safe, and prosperous future. Proposed cuts in climate change projections, sea level research, atmospheric properties that affect climate, and the drivers of Australian climate and extreme events will reduce CSIRO's ability to enable effective adaptation and enhanced resilience to climate hazards. Government must recognize that funding for science is an investment in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We might go to questions now. Senator Damanin.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your opening statements. In your submission, you've called for more transparent decision-making, and I think, Ms Tonks, in your opening statement, you talked about an independent external review of the consultation process. I just wonder if you could talk about what sort of consultation mechanisms you think are most effective, and how might this inquiry encourage CSIRO to scale those processes more quickly, given the experience that your members have had? Please.
Thank you, Senator. Look, from the first round of, science support staff cuts through to these research cuts, what we've seen is it's been done at not only at scale but at a rapid pace. It probably doesn't feel like that to the staff because they feel like they're in an ongoing change management process constantly. But there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of PowerPoints provided, but in actual relevant, real detail for people to be able to give, the people who are directly affected, to be able to give genuine feedback and have responses to that feedback, it's hugely lacking.
Yeah.
I know Dr. Edwards also, recently we were in a consultation forum trying to get information about changes to programs of research. Other than getting the title name of that program of research, there wasn't much detail provided, no matter how many times, the question was asked. So the people who are doing this work, they're not the ones that are that get involved directly, other than a tick and flick process. There's a lot of town halls. They're very moderated and they're very controlled. People, feedback is given. It's rather homogenised and put into themes. But directly, the people who are directly affected and literally at the coalface that will be directly impacted, research scientists, they're not the ones that are giving the input and setting the direction and the strategy of what needs to happen, where there is required to be any kind of change to improve things. And I'm sure Dr. Edwards would concur with that has been our experience the whole time. We spend a lot of time in meetings, but there's not a lot of relevant detail that's provided to staff. There's a lot of PowerPoints, but not a lot of detail. We get numbers. We don't know where we get numbers of staff going. We don't get numbers of, we don't know where they are. We don't know what actual research. It doesn't inform what research projects are going. We get that through surveying and through speaking with members and from member feedback coming to us. They just need to slow it down and do a proper, assess exactly what it is and share that properly. It's a very siloed process currently. When all the support services went for frontline scientists, over that process, the scientists weren't involved in the consultation process, for that. They were considered separate because it wasn't their area. They didn't get to know. So it was, the people that supported the work that they did that was going to increase their workload, or in some cases stop them being able to do project work, they weren't part of that process. So CSIRO really needs to slow this down and have a proper look. I don't know that they can, which is why we have called for an independent look at how this is being done and what the actual future impacts of this is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And you said, again, in your opening statement and it's in your submission, the disconnect between executive management and realities being faced by researchers. I think that's also kind of what you just pointed to then in terms of the disconnect in the consultation process as well. How long do you think this has been the case? And then, just in the interest of time, could you also talk about, to the extent that, despite the comments you've made about the process of consultation, whether there's been a full examination in the view of your members around where additional savings could be made, like, labour hire, contract management. Presumably staff on the ground really know what's going on in an organisation.
They do.
And,
They do.
do you think that their views in that regard have been adequately considered when it comes to trying to address the challenges around sustainability?
I don't think from our experience that, things that people say, well, how are we going to manage this, or how, we could do this differently. There were a couple of areas where it was clear that it couldn't just be a cost measure to make the cuts, because there was a clear impact, and that did make some tweaking around some adjustments. But the staffing cuts across the board have been constant, and they have, and quite significant. And it's been like that from the very beginning. When the first announcements were made in February 2024, we were surprised at the number that were going. We did flag with CSIRO executive at that time, how will you accurately assess and identify what needs to be done? Staff were across the board were really unhappy with that identification process. It was an online. I think they got about, they had about 15 minutes to assess what was needed and what wasn't through an online portal. So that was not an adequate process for how that should have rolled out for what support services for frontline scientists should be retained. Certainly their IT area was one of the ones that took the longest because there were a lot of issues with that area, and I think that is still the case. And it's been like that at that scale and pace from the very beginning. We have actually, throughout the process, through when it began in 2024, we did notify a few disputes because of the pace and some of the corners that were being cut in regard to redundancies.
Thank you. And maybe just finally, what's the view of your members around management's approach to budgeting and planning around allocating resources to the facility maintenance and upkeep? I think specifically with regards to working environments for people and, the kind of strategic planning of that over a period of time.
Yeah, there's been great concern around that. Obviously, CSIRO is an incredibly complex and diverse workplace around the facilities that do need maintaining and to make sure they're safe, and that's always the priority. You've got less people doing that. People are now waiting for maintenance and other things because some of those staff are just simply not there anymore.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all of you for being here. I just want to make sure I've got the numbers right about job losses. You said, I think, over 800, Ms Tonks, but I think your submission said 818 and 350 additional, so a total of 1,168. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Do you believe there are more possible redundancies ahead?
I do. Certainly, CSIRO executive have not ruled out further cuts, and while that 350 does include some term contract staff, it's not including all of them. The feedback we are getting on the ground from across the board is that these numbers are going to be much higher than 350. We certainly hope they are not, but it's looking like that could potentially be the case.
Why? What explanation are you getting? You mentioned the Abbott years saw less cuts than we're seeing now. What explanation are you being given for these cuts now, and how does that compare? What do you say to that comparison? What was happening in the Abbott years that is now so different, where we see even deeper cuts here?
These cuts appear to be, obviously we know that, as I've said in my statement, CSIRO does have, they're desperate for appropriate funding, future funding. It hasn't kept up for so long. That's why where we've arrived at now. The way these cuts have been done, and I'm sure Dr. Edwards and Dr. Rintoul would also confirm this as well, it's been done at such a scale and pace based. It's on cost, it's not on what we need going forward. And it doesn't matter, what people say. I mean, after yesterday's town hall, we did have, I've had a climate scientist contact me to say that, it's in their particular area, which I can tell you what that is called. Just give me 1 second. They've got some very long names on some of these, so bear with me. In the Climate, Atmosphere and Ocean Interactions group, there appears to be up to 12 redundancies that have been flagged as of yesterday, plus term ends as well. And so that equates in that area that what they do is they're responsible for measuring and modelling atmospheric composition, right? And they will, that'll be, within that area itself, it'll be a 21% cut. It is almost like CSIRO are saying, yes, you're seeing this, but you're not really seeing it. They keep saying, oh, yes, we're focused on climate, but then these announcements come out and it counters what is actually happening on the ground.
So I wanted to go to a comment that you made, Mr. Rintoul, or was it Mr. I think it was Mr. Rintoul. Did I hear you correct to say that there is now a requirement that 70% of the funding for research has to be leveraged, come from a partner outside CSIRO? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the general rule of thumb to get a project approved.
And
higher levels are encouraged.
Higher levels are encouraged. I've run a social science research centre for 10 years. There's no way you can run a social science research centre with that kind of parameter. You would shut down social science overnight. We do have increasing grants which require it, but there is no way you can do fundamental social science research on those kinds of numbers. Where you have people who are hostile, for example, to climate change, you're going to, and where there is are not large for-profit companies, how do you grow climate science versus growing science around coal and gas, where there are very profitable large companies with presumably resources they can put into leverage up to 100%. So how does it pervert and how does it shape the research effort on critical questions?
It shapes many aspects of what we do. It affects what contracts we take on. And there's a potential to turn the focus from the national benefit to the benefit of particular clients or stakeholders that are able to pay. And so our ability to determine the research direction that is of most benefit to the nation is hindered because the budget numbers don't add up. The organization desperately needs additional funding. And so it does affect what we do. It affects the projects that we do, and it affects how we do them. Because as the budget has decreased in real terms over many, many years, staffing levels have decreased, and we've lost some of the people we need to actually deliver that national benefit.
So I wanted to ask any of you who want to talk about it, what is the human cost of these changes? I know I've worked a lot with early career researchers, mid-career and senior career researchers. What is this doing to morale for researchers across our scientific community?
I must say... Oh, sorry, Steve, you go.
So in my own area, we had our town hall yesterday afternoon, and there are many devastated staff. People, Australia loves, values, and respects CSIRO as an independent source of advice that gives them the information they need. And the people that work for CSIRO are deeply committed to the place. And so to be told that your role is no longer required, and often with little explanation or explanations that don't hold up, like others in the innovation system can do the work you're doing. We know that's not true, but those are the reasons given for letting some staff go. So it is devastating and it's deep-reaching. We are losing, for my small group alone, we've had 3 resignations in recent months as people have seen the writing on the wall and decided that their careers would be better off somewhere else.
Ms Tonks? Oh, sorry, Mr Rintoul.
I was just going to add, yeah, I think it's across the organisation. So there's a real, I guess, gallows humour around the place these days, and people don't expect to finish their career necessarily in CSIRO anymore. And the number of people you talk to that, towards the end of their careers that are happy to take a redundancy rather than stay is really disheartening for those of us that have been here a long time and and really value the organisation. And then for younger scientists, so we had this Impossible Without You system recently, which we used some of the COVID money for, and brought in a very large number of early career scientists, who came in with a lot of hope and did a lot of really good work, and they were hoping they would potentially get a job at the end of it, and almost all of those have exited the organisation, and exited the organisation in a much more bitter way than they joined it.
Ms Tonks, is there anything you want to add on morale and how the human cost here?
Yes. Look, we've seen this borne out in, the staff survey, their culture survey. It's I think they're on the 3rd one, they're coming up to the 3rd one now, where morale is just like it's so clearly incredibly low. As I said earlier, the scale and pace of these cuts has the way that people are told. It is quite scripted, as Dr. Rintoul has said. Like the way that you're told that you're no longer, required, I had someone this week just say to me, well, we went to a meeting, the four of us went, and we were told our capability, all of our capabilities are no longer required. There's very careful scripting around that, so that, then so it looks like pre-decision consultation, but the proposal's already been, the writing's on the wall, and these people have been waiting since before Christmas, when first announcements came out. So it's as someone said to Senator Pocock not long ago, it is dehumanising the way that this is being done and the scale and pace that it's going at.
Last question. You've talked about consultation. There's a big difference between being told and being consulted. Being told an umbrella number, an envelope number of job losses, not even knowing where they are coming from, which is so critical for scientific bodies of researchers to get to critical mass and be retained and do their work. Yes. But you are being told, not consulted. That's what I'm hearing. And you're not even being told the detail of what the decision is. Now, that is not consultation in my experience as a researcher or as someone who has looked at work for decades. That is a big step away from consultation, is it not?
It is. And there's a lot of, early on, or mid-2024, we did raise consultation disputes around the loss of researchers in health and biosecurity and human health, because they were, it was just done pretty much with 2 days' notice. They were getting rid of 43 of those positions. That was, that was a devastating loss, and majority of those people were in South Australia. There were a few elsewhere, but largely there. There were also 30 out of agriculture and food, and I think there were around 5 out of manufacturing in that round. It's our constant cry to say, you're not giving us relevant information. Data 61 is another example of poor consultation. We are still asking where the 120 positions that have been reduced came from. It was only just before CSIRO executives' appearance in Senate estimates that we finally got admission that there were 120 positions that had been were gone, and it was a 20% reduction. We'd been asking, where were those positions? What were they? What does this mean for the work they were doing? We do know one of them, of course, was the engineer who was working on the Northern Australia Water Assessment Resource Project. So we don't know where they are. We have to do a lot of work to try and find out where all these people are. We know the number, we know the research unit they're going from, but not much else. Like, finding out the actual work that they do is always a challenge.
Can I just ask a last one? Why has management changed? Has there been a shift in the culture? Why is such an appalling practice of non-consultation now the dominant way of working? What's shifted in management to make that happen?
I might refer to Dr. Edwards on this, having been across, the previous management and now the new one. What differences? I've certainly seen them. I certainly know that he has as well.
Can I please ask, as the chair, that the answer be brief, because we do have to go to Senator David Pocock after this.
Yeah, look, to be honest, I'm not sure I can answer that. Obviously, CSIRO's, had changes every 5 years or just over on average at the top, and there tends to be shifts, throughout the structure and the way it's managed as a result of that. But I don't think I can really answer the question.
I think to close it off, I think it seems it seems to me, from what people have said to what it was and what it is now, it's much more corporatised approach now. It's very we have a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, thousands of emails coming through with information. But of course, trying to have a genuine collaborative one-on-one conversation is very difficult at that level.
Thank you. Can I now move to Senator David Pocock?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your time this morning. If I can just start by asking Dr. Rintoul, I'm interested in your reaction to reports last night that 102 full-time equivalent positions will be cut from the Environment Research Unit. Did you know of that in advance? Do you know if staff were provided opportunity for feedback? What is your reaction?
So we knew that staff were going, obviously. We were told that 130 to 150 people would go from environment. There are 102 people being made redundant, announced yesterday, and the extra loss of headcount will be by resignations or retirements that will be factored in. So we will lose apparently 130 to 150 staff. We didn't know anything about where those cuts would be made until a town hall yesterday. And the information that's been provided to date is very general. So, for example, 12 positions lost from a group of 60, and a very brief few-word description of the areas in which it would be cut. But it's still hard at this point to know exactly who is going. And those who have been told that they've been made redundant have not really been told why. CSIRO has listed a number of criteria they would use to determine who should be made redundant, but individual staff are not being told how those criteria were applied to them.
Thank you. Was an explanation at least given as to why details are so general and there's a lack of detail available?
So one reason given is privacy of affected staff. So they suggest that to protect the privacy of staff that are being made redundant, they can't provide information in a way that would be individually identifiable. Whether that's the genuine reason or a convenient reason, I'm not sure. It does make it more difficult to respond during this present period of 3 weeks of consultation. Makes it more difficult to respond to the proposal because we don't know on what basis that proposal was made.
And do you get the sense that CSIRO staff accept these reasons? From where I sit, they seem fairly unsatisfactory.
My impression is that the decisions are being made at a level that where people do not always appreciate exactly what work is being done and why it's important that CSIRO does that work rather than others. For example, I spoke to a staff member yesterday evening who was told that their work was no longer required. He asked why. They said, well, we don't really need to do that sort of modeling anymore. And the staff member asked the leader, do you know what I do? And he said, well, no, not really. And so that's the concern, is that, I think CSIRO leadership, like the leadership of any organization or business, has the responsibility to prioritize work, but they also have the responsibility to base those decisions on sound information and consultation both with staff and with the stakeholders who are affected by the cuts at CSIRO.
Thank you. I find that very shocking, and I appreciate you sharing that anecdote. We have CSIRO later today. Climate scientist Professor Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick, President of the Australian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society, has described the cuts as one of the worst things I've seen during my career. I'm wondering if you agree with that.
I do despair a bit at these cuts, but also, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I despair for the future of science in this country, not just CSIRO, but more broadly. We need, in 2022, the Senate, I believe, set the ambition of funding science R&D in Australia at 3% of GDP. We're about half that and going backwards. So we, as a country, need to decide what sort of future we want, if we want a future that's informed by the best possible science, or if we're just going to take our chances.
And just finally, do you know if we'll be able to continue the Australian climate model after these cuts?
As the reasons for some of the cuts have not really been explained to us in a way with any detail, it's a little difficult to know. My impression is that there's an assumption that others in the Australian innovation system will fill that gap, that CSIRO doesn't need to do it. And that's something you might explore with Andy Hogg from Access NRI, for example, who will come up later today. So there's an attitude that, or a perception that we need deployable solutions, and that's a laudable aim. But what is missing is an appreciation for what those deployable solutions, to use CSIRO's term, are really based on, which is a foundation of foundational science that we are cutting our effort in.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I just had one final question, if that's all right, Chair, to close. It's for the rest of the panel. It touches on the funding of science in this country. The federal government appropriation for the CSIRO has fallen as a share of GDP from 0.17% in the early 1980s to between 0.03 and 0.04% today, a 75% reduction over those decades. Per capita investment in CSIRO is now less than half of what it was in the 80s. I know there's a call for an extra $250 million in the upcoming budget. I was interested if, I'm not sure if this is for you, Ms. Tonks, if you could maybe expand on that and maybe, I guess, speak about the need to increase the appropriation and make it sustainable.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, look, it's very, as far as the funding goes, I think, obviously we came up with that, the figure of $252.3 million was derived from the 2026-27 salary cost data that was based on 500 staff, costs around $108 million. There certainly needs to be a review to ascertain, more detail in funding needs. On top of that, $252.3 million in the 2026-27 financial year. That's just, that's as a baseline going in to funding for the future and using CPI projections in the 25-26 budget. An additional $68.4 million in 2026-27, $79.7 million in 27-28 and $90.8 million in 28-29 would be needed to make sure that there is no real decrease in the funding minimum for CSIRO. As we've said earlier, also the $233 million additional funding through MyEFO, incredibly welcome and was desperately needed to help stabilise some immediate operational and infrastructure pressures. But again, it's a one-off, and we still don't know yet how that's going to be spent going forward. But hopefully, there will be additional funding going forward.
Thank you, Senator Pocock. We've got one quick question from Senator Wish-Wilson, please. Who's on?
Yes, sorry, Chair, just two very quick questions. I chaired the Select Committee nearly 10 years ago into attempts to cut jobs in oceans and atmosphere, and it seems to me while external circumstances might have changed, the priorities are very similar. It's public good science, it's in the national interest, that's hard to monetise. So my first question is there any evidence in terms of this consultation process that staff have been going through that they've been that this issue has been raised about how much they have been able to monetise the work they do? Has it been obvious?
No, I don't think it's been obvious. I think the reality is that it's not that CSIRO does not believe in the value of public good science and the need for it. I think they genuinely believe in that. But the budget situation is simply desperate. And so they are they've essentially tried everything. Labor hire, cutting staff, restricting travel, we no longer subscribe to the same journals we used to because we can't afford it. It's simply desperate times. So in an attempt to make the budget work. They pushed harder and harder on external funding, and as a result, public good science has suffered. And that's in part because the funders for public good science, which are often government departments, have also been budget constrained and no longer willing to co-invest in the same way that they once were.
Okay, thank you. Just second question is, yesterday AI company Anthropic released their modelling of which industries or professions would be most impacted by the emergence of AI, and I just noted with interest that mathematics, modelling, through to social sciences was going to be very heavily impacted and replaced by AI. Has that come up in discussions at all, that some of the modelling capacity that we've heard being targeted in oceans and atmospheres is going to be impacted by AI?
Not that I'm aware of. AI has been part of the conversation in the sense that they feel one of the priorities for future work by CSIRO is work on AI and its applications in Australia. But there's been no explicit discussion that I'm aware of that the cuts in staff at the present time will be compensated by AI doing more of that work.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wishwilson. And thank you, panel. I appreciate you appearing today.